Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to Rokofuria Ashburton Art Gallery and Museum. My name's Louisa and I am the curator of social history here at the museum. Thank you for being here today and joining us for the special heritage talk associated with our current exhibition Dearly Beloved, 100 Years of the Wedding Dress. Before we begin, I will go over some housekeeping. Our nearest wharepaku toilet facilities are located just behind us there on the upstairs corridor. And in the case of an emergency, please follow me, our gallery leads Sam and Katie, or our downstairs staff to the nearest exit. Our assembly point is in the visitor car park. This presentation will be recorded and Sam's just taken a few snaps while we're gathered today. Due to another event set up after this talk, Jane is happy to take questions down in the gallery after her talk. So at the end, we will hold our questions and vacate the space and finish with questions downstairs. So it is my pleasure to formally introduce this morning's speaker, Dr. Jane Malthus. Jane is a dress historian and honorary curator for the dress collection at Tūhura Otago Museum and a founding member of Costumes and Textiles Aotearoa New Zealand. She has an academic background in textiles, clothing and fashion, history and fine arts. Her research explores historical, social and cultural intersections of dress and textiles used by 19th and 20th century New Zealanders. Jane's recent major work has been as curator for the Eden in Dunedin exhibition of garments from Otago farmer J. Eden Hawes' collection. Jane has been involved with the Eden Haw collection since the 1980s. She is a current patron and steering group member for Eden Haw Central Otago and co-authored with Claire Renaud, Central Otago Couture, the Eden Haw collection, published by Te Papa Press. A beautiful book illustrated by photographer Derek Henderson, and we have this downstairs in our shop. Jane and Claire spoke on this project as part of last year's Word Christchurch Festival. Here at Rokofuria, we were very lucky to have Jane provide her advice and expertise on the collection during the development of our current exhibition, Dearly Beloved. If you visited the main display, you will notice that a number of wedding gowns displayed from our collection are indeed not white. And this fashion choice, as it may be, is the starting point for today's special heritage talk, titled Not Always White, Coloured Wedding Dresses as Fashion and Anti-Fashion. Kia ora, Jane. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jane Malthus.
Just to start with this slide, this is my youngest sister Claire wearing white and me wearing not white, partly because when James and I got married we organised our wedding in 3 weeks. And I bought a dress. It's a Thornton Hall dress and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Bridal dresses are of course symbolic of a rite of passage, a change in status, and they also vary depending on cultural context. And I'm talking mostly about, of course, wedding dresses in our culture, but I just wanted to mention that in various other parts of the world, colours are different. So in Asian countries, red is considered the colour of happiness and is dominant in traditional wedding dresses, while white is the colour of mourning in some of those cultures, particularly for followers of Confucianism. When Japanese brides, for instance, wear white kimono or uchikaki, as they're called when they're a bridal one. It symbolises the separation from their birth family. In Hungary, for instance, green is the traditional colour for bridal dresses. However, it has to be said that white, Western cultural white, is getting more and more preeminent in many countries. Last time I was in China, for instance, with students, we were photographing in one of the gorgeous garden areas near Shanghai, and there were numbers of brides having their photographs taken in their princess-like Western meringue kind of wedding dresses. and clearly loving it. Queen Victoria is credited with popularising the white wedding dress. She got married in 1840 and she was only 20 at the time. She had already been crowned queen in 1837, but she chose a fashionable dress instead of wearing her coronation robes. It's white satin with Honiton lace, which was made in England, had that very low, wide neckline and tiny little puffed sleeves. The train fell from the waist. The veil was held with orange blossom. And the reason why her dress was popularised so much was, of course, because this was now the age of newspapers, printing, distribution of magazines and photographs. And so images and text about this wedding and about her dress spread all over the English-speaking world. She was thought to personify the ideal woman, the domestic angel, even though she was a queen. But that look and this look, another princess, gives people in a way the opportunity to think about being a princess for a day, living a fairy tale, as it were, becoming Cinderella even. But of course it also symbolises leaving the family of origin, experiencing sex, bearing and raising children, managing a household, all those things that come after the wedding, supposedly. And traditional bridal attire, of course, still includes all the things that Queen Victoria and Princess Diana had: the head covering or veil, a formal or full-length dress, a train, the white colour, of course, flowers, embroidery, beading, lace. And many princesses before Queen Victoria had worn white or versions of white, but we credit Queen Victoria with popularising it. Most other people, though, in the 19th century couldn't really afford to have a white dress that they wouldn't ever wear again, completely impractical for the times and the places, and especially in places like New Zealand when European settlers came here. This dress in Otago Museum was worn as a wedding dress. It was made on board the boat, the Chile, on the passage to Port Chalmers in 1861, and then worn as a wedding dress by its owner. And it's very typical of its time, with the eye being drawn to the centre front waist to make the waist look smaller, and it's got pagoda sleeves. Those sleeves would have had an undersleeve, probably, that was white, that fastened in at the wrist to cover the arms. So let's look at some of the themes in relation to wedding dresses. So one of the first ones, which was mentioned in a New Zealand Herald article in 1892, is that white simply doesn't suit some people, some women. And I just want to quote from this. "There have been some very smart weddings lately. Though bengaline and brocaded silks are much worn, an eminent authority on dress asserts that ivory-tinted satin," so that's a kind of not white, "is most becoming to a bride. It is a regrettable fact that whereas most women desire to look their best on this all-important occasion, many appear at considerable disadvantage and look far less well than ordinarily." And it goes on. I've just copied out the rest of this. "The bridal robe of white is frequently excessively unbecoming, and if any lady suspects that white is inimical for her, by all means eschew tradition and be married in a travelling dress of some becoming colour. Often the bridesmaids look far more attractive than the bride when she happens to be one of those to whom white is disfiguring." I love how open and honest these writers were back in the day. So this may have been the case with Jessie Tolmie, who wore this gold damask wedding dress in 1883 when she became Resident Magistrate Brian Haggart's second wife and the stepmother to his 9 children. She was 23 when she married Brian, who was 44 and a widower, obviously. He'd trained in the law in Tasmania and came to Dunedin in 1862 to establish a law firm. He became a Crown Solicitor, a member of the Provincial Council, a JP, a magistrate and Chancellor of the Anglican Diocese, so he did very well for himself. Jessie and Brian went on to have another 9 children, which might explain maybe why this dress wasn't necessarily worn very much after the wedding. So the dress has a long bodice, a skirt and a train, so it's got 3 separate pieces, and these beautiful carved shell buttons that fasten the bodice, and there are half hoops in the back to hold that bustle shape out, and the train buttons on to the skirt underneath. So this is the bottom of the bodice here, and then the train part buttons on up here somewhere. So it was quite a complicated arrangement. Jessie and her mother may have seen descriptions in the local Otago Witness of the Princess of Wales wearing a dress of gold brocade and satin, as this is, that had yellow roses on it. I don't know if you can see that in this close-up, but there are flowers and even thorns on the branches in this damask fabric. The satin part of the dress is showing signs of wear now, but it's great that it still exists. Another reason for wearing a non-white wedding dress, particularly in the 19th century, was that ability to wear it after the wedding. So practicality, obviously, and economy and thrift. Linda Baumgarten, who wrote a book called What Clothes Reveal about colonial and federal America, talked about weddings ranging from small ceremonies at home to royal occasions, and that weddings called for the best clothing and accessories the bride and groom could afford. But she says few could invest in a dress or a suit or other items solely dedicated to a single event. Brides expected to wear their wedding gown for years, and so chose patterned silk or wool or some other practical colour. So let's just go back in time a little bit. This is a painting called The Sacrament of Marriage from 1492, when red was a very popular colour in Europe for both bride and groom to wear, and that went on actually for centuries. And this painting by Peter Bruegel the Younger depicts a wedding procession. I'll just see if I can get this pointer to work. The groom is here. So they had separate processions for the bride and the groom, and each would be followed by their parents. So this is the groom, and he's wearing a red hat in this case, and red nether hose, and he's got a little crown on his head. And then the bride is over here, also wearing a crown, and she's got page boys on either side of her, and she's in a warm coat, basically. And maybe she didn't have a father at this point in her life, it's hard to say, but she's being followed by 2 women who were no doubt related to her. This dress was worn twice as a wedding dress. First, so it's 1740, it was worn by a woman called Mary Waters in Salem, Massachusetts, so it's an American example. But these kind of brocaded silks were common in the 18th century. And then it was remodelled and worn again in 1768 by her daughter, also called Mary Waters. It is shown here on an older person, or maybe a person just with powdered hair, which was also quite popular at the time. And there are many 19th century examples in New Zealand museums. There's one downstairs in the exhibition, the beautiful little exhibition downstairs. If you haven't seen it, come down afterwards for question time. These are examples from Toitu Museum in Dunedin. I do quite a bit of work with them on various aspects, particularly of 19th century dress, so these were convenient images for me to use. But Jennifer Quere, who was a curator at Canterbury Museum, where they also have numbers of 19th century wedding dresses, coloured wedding dresses, she wrote about the remarkable standards of dress attained by colonial immigrants of the working class. The materials used in all these dresses are of very good quality, and the dresses and suits follow the fashions of the day to quite a large degree. There's evidence of very good dressmaking skills in the colony. And I've done separate work on dressmakers in 19th century New Zealand, so I can attest to that, having looked at many examples of these dresses in museum collections around the country. They are all extremely well made. And on the whole, the fabrics are probably quite a lot better quality than we have access to today. So a range of colours, a range of styles depending on the actual date. Here are bustle versions. Yep, electric blue. That's a shot fabric, so it's like blue in one direction and maybe a red or a purple in the other direction, so you get that vibrant effect going on. So very much following the fashions of the day. This one, we have a photograph of the wearer, which is fantastic. And it's an example of a green dress. There are not many green dresses in the 19th century, partly because in order to fix a green colour you needed to use arsenic. And so there were reports in the paper of a ball dress, for instance, that was green, and the writer said, and it's giving off a cloud of arsenic as the person dances, which I'm sure was a complete exaggeration, but made for good press. So all of those garments could be worn for multiple occasions after the wedding, especially if they were looked after well, and maybe altered skillfully. And there are examples of ones that have been altered a lot in museum collections, although quite a few look as if they haven't been much worn after a wedding. And my speculation about that is that a wedding is such a special occasion and such a rite of passage that somehow there's never quite a good enough occasion to wear that dress again. Or the other alternative, of course, is that people get pregnant, women get pregnant quite quickly, and then the dress doesn't fit afterwards. Another 19th century example is this one from the States. Elizabeth was from a wealthy family, but married a painter who painted this picture, whose economic status was well below hers, and her father did not approve of the match. So she got married in this travelling dress and hat with a muff, which was clearly very stylish, very serviceable, very suitable for lots of occasions after the marriage. So another theme that comes through in wedding dresses is that of making a point in some way, and I think that's common still today, but I have a particular example here of people making a point. This is the wedding of Kate Walker and James Wilkinson that took place on January the 13th in 1894 in Christchurch. And it's the photograph that got me started on this whole career of writing and researching about dress and its intersections with other aspects of our history, because it's such an unusual wedding party. This photograph appeared in Standard and Precious, a big version of it, in Standard and Precious showroom in Christchurch, attracting considerable attention, as they no doubt planned, and it was reported on even in the Queen in England, the magazine The Queen. Kate Walker and James Wilkinson had co-authored a pamphlet, a reasonably substantial little booklet about dress reform in New Zealand, advocating that women leave off their corsets in a sort of progression, as it were, getting to a final point of wearing knickerbockers rather than skirts. They were making a point about the tight lacing of corsets and corset wearing generally, and in fact the whole system of garments, undergarments that women wore at this time in the 1890s. This is the time, so my PhD looked at numbers of actual dresses around the country, and I took measurements of them, and the 1890s is the time at which the waistline was the narrowest for all of these garments over a period from 1840s to the 1910s. This period that these women are commenting on really was the time when the waistline was at its narrowest, regardless of what size the person actually was. So they did have something to be complaining about, as it were. But Patricia Cunningham wrote in her book Reforming Women's Fashion 1850 to 1920 about this whole system of underwear. Corsets or stays, bustles, pads, a chemise, petticoats and drawers, all worn underneath not these outfits but regular outfits, to provide the fashionable shape and protect the outer garments from body oils and perspiration. They did, of course, add warmth as well, but they also accentuated physical attributes and served an erotic function. Think of the bustle, for example. So going without such underwear, as these women are, in public suggested wantonness, a looseness of morals. So that was the kind of context in which these women are operating. And let's just remind ourselves of New Zealand at that time in terms of women's status. By the time of this wedding, all New Zealand women of 21 or over had gained the vote. Over 109,000 of them, that was 84% of the adult female population, had enrolled to vote, and over 90,000 of them actually voted in November of 1893. There were more than 45,000 women wage earners, according to the New Zealand census of 1891. Married women had property rights, and more than half of New Zealand's university students were women, including these women. These women were either students or graduates of Canterbury University. But of course that did not mean that they had independence or equality of any sort. In fact, when I wrote about dress reform in 1989, women were still expected to establish and preserve the sanctity of the home, guard the virtue, morality and gentility of the settlers, be symbols of the family's position in society, and follow without question the current rules of etiquette and propriety. So choosing to be married outside of those conventions was something that these women, or Kate Walker, could do because of this friendship group that she was part of. They were associated with Kate Shepherd as well, all of these people, in the advocation of women getting the vote in New Zealand. James Wilkinson, the groom, was in fact the secretary of an organisation to that effect and wrote numerous letters to the paper. I've since discovered, thank you, Papers Past. When I first started this work, there was no Papers Past. You couldn't look things up digitally. Took forever. But now you can see all those, more of those intersections. Okay, moving forward in time. Another theme for wearing coloured wedding dresses is the influence of world events. So things like World War I, the flu epidemic, Hollywood movies, even if you could call that world events, the 1929 crash and World War II all affected the economy, the provision of textiles, and people's aspirations. So this is a wedding from around 1920 where the bride is wearing a suit, essentially, a jacket and a skirt, and this gorgeous fur. So dresses had become quite straight and flat by the beginning of the 1920s, although, as you can see, the lengths were still quite long then. The hemline fluctuated quite a bit in the late teens and early 20s. The natural waistline had kind of disappeared. The emphasis was either up under the bust or down on the hips. This combination of fabric and fur, though, was promoted and fashioned by the Russian émigrés to the West at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution. So trimming and draping garments with fur or wearing furs as outerwear became very popular in the 1920s, and you will probably all have photos of relatives wearing their fur stoles, for example, or fur collars. The year after the end of World War I saw many marriages in New Zealand despite the influenza pandemic. In the Auckland Star at the end of 1919, a writer says, "It's been a remarkable year for giving in marriage, so far as Auckland is concerned. Reports that soldiers were marrying maids in England proved to be exaggerated. Over 1,700 marriage licences were issued in Auckland in 1919, compared with just over 1,000 in 1918. More than 400 of those couples united at registry offices. Before the war, civil marriages had a much smaller percentage. The writer suggested that wartime uncertainties and experiences could have influenced that statistic. And there are many examples of coloured wedding dresses featuring in the newspapers during 1919. And interestingly, a lot of those articles talk about the weddings being quiet, as in small, just relatives, for example, and that is presumably because of the flu epidemic. They didn't understand necessarily the transmission of the disease in the way that we now do in relation to COVID, for example. But they knew enough to not be, inviting all and sundry. But just as some examples, I don't have images of these, but in Greymouth, a bride wore a sapphire blue tailored costume with a pale pink hat. In Alexandra, a bride wore a dark brown costume with a hat to match. This one I absolutely love. The bride in a Littleton wedding, or a Christchurch, I'm not sure, but she looked really charming in a grey kitten's ear satin frock. Can you just picture that colour? Grey kitten's ear with touches of pink. And the freelance mentioned a Wellington wedding where the bride wore a very artistic gown of nattier blue crepe georgette. I'm not quite sure what the nattier refers to, with a jumper of paisley silk in tones of blue, pink and green, which I'm coveting still, having read that. And again in Littleton, a bride wore sax blue, which is a kind of mid-blue chemise frock. So that kind of press of people wearing colour did help, I think, other brides make those choices as well. In the 1920s, though, there was a bit of an attitudinal change for women, and that was partly due to the imbalance in the demographics, because so many men of marriageable age had been killed in World War I. So women were a bit freer, more independent, more individualised perhaps, and there was more of a diversity of brides, often second-time marriages happening. The wearer of this dress typified that more independent choice. Olga Gloy did a home science degree at the University of Otago in the 1920s and then obtained a Rockefeller scholarship to Columbia University, where she did her PhD in chemistry and nutrition. So she came back to New Zealand after that, around 1927, as an associate professor at the university in the home science department. She bought this dress in Arthur Barnett's in Dunedin for her wedding in March 1929 to a Canadian man who she'd met while she was in the States. It was probably made and embroidered in France. Arthur Barnett's had at that time a representative in London who did a lot of buying for them in England and France. And this very flared dress style, so we haven't, because it's quite fragile now, as you might imagine, we haven't hung it up or put it on a form, so it's photographed flat there, so you can't see the skirt is like virtually a full circle and has this amazing sequin band at the bottom. And there's this gorgeous gold embroidery with Art Deco and classical designs over its surface. Got an ant walking across my page. Just let it go somewhere. So from the 1930s onwards, it was possible for those who wanted to choose white to choose to do that in a way, because rayon and nylon and then later polyester could all be made in what was called optical white, where the white elements, things like titanium dioxide, are actually added to the solution for those fibres before they're spun. And so the white would stay true, as it were. And the 1930s also saw all those traditional elements of wedding dress design being kind of cemented in place. Long dresses, formal, flowery embellishment, the headpieces and veils, the bouquets, and historical references. There are quite a lot of 30s wedding dresses, for instance, that look medieval, as it were, or some that look Elizabethan or princess line, and then from the 50s you get the Cinderella impact with the movie film versions of Cinderella in the 1950s. But there were also lots of colours featuring. So this is just a representative sample of the colours mentioned in New Zealand newspapers, again thanks to papers past. Blue was very popular. Pink was probably the most popular colour, and there's a beautiful pink velvet wedding dress downstairs from the 1930s. Green, orange, grey, black, lilac. There were also lots of cream dresses, which of course is a version of white, but fits under that coloured theme. And these are just two examples of wedding dresses from the 30s. But I do want to mention the Duchess of Windsor, because her dress was quite influential. So Wallis Simpson, of course, as you may well remember, some of you anyway, married Prince Edward, who had been very briefly the King of England, in 1937, and she had been married and divorced twice already, which was absolutely scandalous as far as everybody was concerned. And the reason why he abdicated, because he really wanted to marry her, and there couldn't be a divorcee, as his consort if he stayed on the throne. So she wore a blue dress and jacket. So what we're really seeing there is the jacket part of the outfit, that was designed by Mainbocker, who was a designer who worked with her a lot, and in fact developed this colour which is called Wallis Blue, supposedly because it matched her eyes perfectly. So the dress was dyed that colour. What's interesting now, the dress is in the Met Museum in New York. It has lost all that blue colour now, so the blue was quite fugitive, and it's now a kind of ecru or a lighter version of ecru colour now. And she wore this little halo hat as well. But what's interesting is that that style got copied a lot. You see it in day dresses, evening dresses, particularly that little curved seam and the gathers. And when I looked at my wedding dress again, photo of, I thought, oh my lord, it's quite similar. Hadn't picked that. So my dress was made by Thornton Hall. I got married in 1988. Bought it off the rack as it were at Arthur Barnett's. Good old Arthur Barnett's. It did have massive shoulder pads here, which are not that obvious, and I don't know what's happened to the shoulder pads. And I did try and put it on. I thought, oh, I could wear it today, but actually I couldn't do it up. And having put it on, I really struggled to get it off again. So it'll have to wait, until I lose some more weight. But I loved it actually, and because we organised our wedding in 3 weeks flat, I didn't have time to make anything. But it served the purpose, and the hat that I wore, also a straw hat, was decorated for me by a recently retired colleague who had been a milliner during the Second World War in New York. She got stuck there as a New Zealander, couldn't get back during the war, and so she got a job as a milliner, and she said, oh, yeah, so she put the ribbon around the outside of it and put these flowers on the top. It was great. Okay, so coming forward in time, I think that idea of avoiding the symbolism of white that the Duchess of Windsor was clearly doing still carries on. And so now I've just got a few images of weddings I've been to, friends I've got who chose not to wear white and wore other colours. These two, my sister-in-law Geraldine and my very good friend Sally, both had been previously married and chose to wear blue suits of one sort or another. Diane Jackson got married at Mount Somers in 1995 and wore this gorgeous, again, blue outfit. She had quite a lot of drama with her dress, however, because, and I'm quoting from her now, her perfume reacted with the fabric of the dress when she put it on, leaving nightmarish blotches. The bridesmaid heroically averted disaster with damp cloth and water. Needless to say, the bride arrived late at the church. And then this is another of my sisters, Susan, and a very good friend, Megan, who both wore silver grey shades for their wedding dresses. But you notice, there's still the trappings of weddings, the veils and the flowers and so on, in some cases anyway. This is Betty, who is Hong Kong Chinese. She married Tao, who was a master's student with us in clothing textile sciences at the time, in Dunedin, and so she wore this black outfit but with red because that was very symbolic for her, or gold and red. She loved gold. They got married. This is the only registry office wedding I've ever been to. We got there and we're sitting, and the celebrant said, please take your photos now. There won't be time afterwards or something. I thought, oh, that's why. The whole ceremony was over in 5 minutes. And then we retired to a wonderful Chinese restaurant for a banquet. It was great. And this out of focus, sorry, I realised, photo is my cousin's wife. So Sarah and Tim had 2 children before they decided that they would get married, and Sarah wore this fabulous 1930s inspired green satin dress and arrived in a car to match. A gorgeous 30s automobile. So another theme is being eco-friendly. And this is possibly a more modern theme. Sang-Hee Kwon wrote a paper about this in 2017, Green's the New White, and she suggested these various reasons for types of eco-wedding dress. One's made from eco-friendly materials, such as hemp or organic cotton, wool or silk, or wild silk, or using lyocell, which is tencel, or PLA, which is made from corn and sugarcane, for example. The dress could be made from pre- or post-consumer waste, such as vintage fabric or vintage garments, or offcuts, or dead stock. So dead stock is fabric or garments that haven't sold, particularly garments that haven't sold. And I'll show you an example of a dress made from that shortly. So they're going to landfill if they're not used in any other way. And there's quite a lot of issues with dead stock, particularly from designer houses. They can be made with less material or less waste, so you can make a short dress rather than a long one, or you can do much more efficient pattern cutting, so there's less waste, or you can patchwork. They can be convertible, so they might have detachable parts to them, so that part of the dress at least can be worn again, or you can wear something in multiple ways. So Diane's dress, for instance, you could wear the top separately to the skirt, for example, or same with other suits too. They could be previously worn, so you could have bought it from an op shop or some other second-hand outlet. It could be rented, and there are numbers of people running businesses renting wedding dresses now. It could be borrowed. It could be something that had been sold to raise money for charity. Or they can be altered for reuse after the wedding by shortening them or removing some of the parts or dyeing them, hopefully in an eco-friendly way, for example. So just some examples of those. So Helen on the left wore a wool outfit with gold shoes. I really like that, for her wedding. That was in 1983, I think. Sorry, I've got this somewhere. Yes, 1983. This is the dead stock outfit, designed as a wedding dress by Paul Castro Alvarez, and was in an exhibition we had at Otago Museum in 2021, I think, called Fashion Forward. So it's made from men's white shirts. So you can see these are collars from the original shirts being used as cuffs, more collars here, and cuffs and sleeves and various parts of the outfit, all being, it was a stunning dress, I have to say, really gorgeous. And this is a friend, Sarah, who had this sort of drape skirt, which was detachable. She was a Sarok dancer and teacher, still is, I think. And so she shed the long skirt afterwards to be able to dance. Of course, lots of people just choose colour because they want to be different, or they want to have a theme, and in this case, this was a Gothic wedding. This is an American example. Abigail, the bride, was a set designer, and you can see that maybe from the curation going on here at their wedding. And you may know this person. Oh, where are we? No, wrong one. This is Lizzie in her gorgeous wedding dress, which she purchased from an American designer website. Hertiage, which is, this often happens, I've heard this story many times, of people who purchase a ball dress or a wedding dress from a website, it arrives but it doesn't fit properly, and they either have to get it altered here or they have to send it back to get it altered, and then you've got that pressure of, is it going to get back in time? And then this is my cousin Bronwyn on this side, and her sister, who was her maid of honour, absolutely choosing to be different and not wear white. Other people want to show off crafts that they have in their family or themselves. So these are members of the Packer family. This is Jenna, whose painting is straight out there when you walk out. So she married Scott in 1995, and she chose a kind of Elizabethan-inspired dress for which she and her mother both did the embroidery on the bodice, which is Dupion silk. She bought the rest of the fabric in Auckland for $10 a metre. And Scott wore a silk vest that was also embroidered, I think probably by Helen. So Jenna and Kate's mother, Helen Packer, is a renowned embroiderer and patchworker, lives in Dunedin. So it's something that runs deep in their family. And Kate wanted a medieval style wedding dress, so Jenna and Helen joined forces to make her wedding dress. These images come from a friend and former fellow student of mine, Liz Miller. We were both students in home science in the 1970s, and Anita saw an image of a dress like this in a magazine and wanted this poppy theme. So it is white, but with the idea of poppies. So we've got embroidery and the poppies featuring on all of the bridal parties' dresses, and Liz made all of those. And then this one, Liz's daughter, is the bridesmaid for this wedding, where again you've got a variation on the theme of cream and colour, I guess. So those images, those last few images, come from two separate displays, parades of wedding dresses that were held at Knox Church. They were a fundraisers to repair the roof of Knox Church in Dunedin. Very successful. I got involved as the kind of compere for them, but sort of doing some background work as well. So that's how come I have all these images. And I just want to finish off with talking about designers who've shown or made bespoke coloured wedding dresses, because that's another way in which these things get popularised and people then can buck the trend, as it were, and adopt a non-white dress. So first, this is Alexandra Posen, who is the sister of Zach Posen, an American fashion designer, and he made this dress for her, which is covered in poppies, or fabric poppies. And then here on this side is a Christian Lacroix wedding dress from 1993-94. So designers traditionally always finished their fashion shows, their couture fashion shows, with a wedding dress. Doesn't always happen now, but it did for a long time. Was always the sort of final garment. But this particular one, Christian Lacroix, he named this dress, and it translates in English, "Who has the right?" And what he meant was, whether should a contemporary bride wear a dress associated with purity anymore. Times have changed. This is Kate Moss wearing Vivienne Westwood. So Vivienne Westwood has designed lots of tartan wedding dresses over the years. This one's from 1993. And then this is Gwen Stefani in her John Galliano, which starts out white at the top, but then morphs into this bright pink at the bottom. And of course, lots of people made all sorts of stories about what that represented. And then finally, this is an exhibition that I curated with and for Tanya Carlson at the Dunedin Public Art Gallery, and I think it was about 2015. So Tanya Carlson's a New Zealand designer who started out making bespoke garments but moved into ready-to-wear, but still carried on making some bespoke wedding dresses. So some of these are white, as you can see, but many of them aren't. This one, which is loosely based on I think a John Galliano design, was made with Tanya, but with also her 2IC, as it were, for that person's wedding. Some of them I just can't remember the complete history. This one I would have to say is my all-time favourite. Tanya is an absolute master in draping fabric, so just taking the fabric, putting it on a dress form and draping. I think it's entirely possible that this dress has like 1.5 seams in it. Only Christian Dior once said, the best dress is the one with the fewest seams. And this one wins, I think. It's got this beautiful, you can't see it from here, sorry, but it's a sort of textured piece of the velvet stitched in there, and that's kind of the point at which all of the fabric kind of emanates from. One of the white dresses here, and I'm just thinking it might be that one, was Sarah Ulmer's wedding dress, which was designed and made while Sarah was still competing at the Olympics, I think. But then it had to be taken in down the thighs, because after she stopped cycling, her thighs got thinner again. So before the wedding happened, I think I've got a closer up, actually. There's a close-up of that. Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous. And that is the end of this talk. I am very happy to answer any questions you've got, but we do need to do that downstairs in the little exhibition, or even in the foyer.
And we can get some extra.
So happy to enter into any questions and discussion, but we'll have to leave that until we move, sorry, because of the setup for the next workshop that's happening. But thank you all for your attendance.